Welcome to the stage, Stuart Powell, OT Security Engineer at Elanco Animal Health. He's here today to present The Other Side, IT-OT Networking, Interpersonal Communication Lessons for a Strong OT Security Program.
Good morning, and thank you all. I want to thank the ICS conference team for inviting me to share these lessons learned with you all. And as I said on the introduction, I'm the OT security engineer with Elanco Animal Health, and those responsibilities include developing and implementing an OT security program for Elanco's global manufacturing. We have manufacturing sites for animal health products in Asia, Europe, and North America. So just in the interest of time, I've got a lot to get through. If you have a question, write it down, and hopefully I'll have enough time at the end that we can touch on those. A little background on myself. I'm finishing my 40th year of professional experience after college, so that's how old I am. My educational background is in electrical engineering technology with almost no computer experience. I don't like that. So my first professional job was teaching introductory electronics classes. And then after that, I went into industry at a plastics film manufacturing company. And what I did there was as a project engineer, electrical project engineer, and because I was the young guy in 1984, every computer project got assigned to me. Remember, I didn't take any computer programming or computer hardware classes in college. Got assigned to me, and I spent 17 years as an electrical engineer managing discrete controls, PLCs, DCSs, instrumentation, basic networking when it became available, and Unix administration. Then I moved to the dark side, business IT. I went in as a Unix administrator. I also picked up storage arrays administration, backup management, and finally, I went even darker, Windows systems administration on a virtualized environment. In 2016 and 2017, over the span of about 10 months, we faced and overcame 3 ransomware attacks that completely encrypted our file management system for our largest manufacturing site. And we also had an active hack that completely encrypted our production, testing, and development of our SAP ERP environment. We survived those incidences, recovered, we didn't pay any ransom, and I kept my job. 5 years ago, unrelated to that, I joined the Elanco process automation team at one of its largest manufacturing sites in Indiana as an OT engineer, but my job was to fill in the IT gaps that weren't happening in those manufacturing systems. 18 months ago, I moved into my most recent position as OT security. I didn't know anything about it. Now, what precipitated my initial employment in Elanco was the 2018 Elanco spinoff from Eli Lilly. And if anybody has been through a business separation, you know there's a lot of things involved with making that change. We got the opportunity as Elanco to build a brand new IT infrastructure. And if you notice on the slide, the red text, becoming an independent company is hard work. That is the understatement of the year. If you've been through that, you know. And we had 3 years to complete that plan. A lot of work. It was hard. But through that, we faced a lot of challenges that dealt with the connections between IT and OT. And those lessons that we learned out of that, they weren't all negative. We learned a lot of bad things about each other. We also learned a lot of good things about the capabilities on both the OT side and the IT side. And that's what I want to build from here. We had a lot of plans in place to deal and build that new infrastructure. We had a lot of meetings about assigning IP addresses, and we did basically readdress almost every device in the OT network. I don't know about the IT side, I'm sure they did too. So manufacturing computers, controllers, instrumentation, and all of that was so that we could have a foundation on which to build a cyber-secure OT environment. Some of my first responsibilities involved discussing with the IT team what our OT environment should look like in this new environment. And these discussions, a part of the Project Stallion, they were around the technical aspects of integrating OT into the IT environment. And so we had plans to discuss those details. We talked about the cutover to the new infrastructure. We talked about network segmentation, did a lot of that. Switch configurations to support that. VLANs, subnets, identifying TCP ports and protocols, all the typical technical discussions that you need in order to complete this technical transition from one environment to another. That was the easiest part of the transition. Everybody on the IT and OT teams came up with very extensive plans and playbooks to get through the migration from the Lily network to the Elanco network. However, we were unprepared for the bigger challenges. The bigger challenges was the other OT-IT networking. Interpersonal communication. There were no detailed plans laid out on how the people in those organizations needed to work together to accomplish this huge undertaking. They just said, go do it. Nothing that was in place to discover and define the differences between IT and OT responsibilities, technical capabilities, or even basic expectations. Nothing. Now, the good news is we made it through the transition. Elanco has stood up their network between the time that it wasn't all on me, between the time I joined in the summer of 2021, we moved all the manufacturing sites and all the commercial sites. Don't really care about the commercial sites. They're important, but the manufacturing sites were the key. And we got them moved to the new design. We had very little downtime. The technical plans worked great, but the struggle came with those interpersonal connections, that peer-to-peer team networking that was not planned for, and that were our pain points. And through those 3 years of the migration, we learned how to communicate. We went from baud rate to 10.5, 10 base 5. And looking back on that experience, I want to share 5 key lessons that I observed, that may be more lessons out there that other people observed, but 5 things I learned. I want to share those with you. It's not something I did. It's not something that was dependent upon any one group. It was a collaborative effort between the IT and the OT teams at every site. But these are just the things observed. And I want to summarize these lessons over on the right. Building relationships, communicating priorities, identifying differences, explaining technology, and then finding collaborative spaces. Again, none of these things are big paradigm shifts as far as I was concerned in interpersonal communication, but applying them was always a challenge. Because often we had to deal with these areas, we learned these lessons not in the meetings where we were planning, but in the conflicts that resulted from the implementation. And I believe the root of interpersonal communication is finding ways to work in conflict. So I want to share some of the differences, or some of the difficulties we lived out, and the processes that we worked through to resolve them. There are still some obstacles. We are not a well-oiled, flowing machine, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But we continue to work on our differences and work together. Again, I'm not the person who did this all. I didn't lead it. I was just one of the cogs in the wheel. And I'll touch on some of the steps and some of the incidences that I remember and I focused on, but it was a team effort. So the first one, building relationships. The first challenge to improving IT/OT organizational networking is breaking down interpersonal segmentation. The difference between the two IT teams at Elanco were stark. The IT organization was a well-developed global network of talent, stretching. I mentioned the three manufacturing areas, regions in Asia, in Europe, and in North America. They had those responsibilities. They had a massive team that dealt with that globally. The OT organization consisted, well, there really wasn't one, there was one person that had responsibility for global OT, and she was half-time. The other time she was dealing with the manufacturing engineers at one of our manufacturing sites. And so OT consisted of multiple small organizations at manufacturing locations. Their responsibility, as you all know, was to keep operations going at that site, to plan for the migration, but to keep operations focused on there. There was some collaboration between the different manufacturing sites, but for the most part, it was local. And that's a challenge. The day-to-day work often got in the way with the strategic planning. That's still a problem. Now, in my previous employment, when I went to the dark side, I became an OT champion within the IT environment. And that's one of the things you need to look for in building those relationships. For those of you who are OT engineers or OT managers, you need to start looking for the IT people who understand or want to learn about your systems. When I moved into IT at my previous employment, I began sitting in on the meetings. And when I heard about IT changes that were being planned, I asked, how's this going to affect the manufacturing systems? Often the response was, because they hadn't thought about it. And so I'd take the initiative to let the engineers know what was coming, when it was coming, and how it would impact them. When the Windows administrator insisted that OT computers be patched on a monthly basis when he wanted to, I said, no. As a peer, I could say, no, you can't do that. You're going to break things. At Elanco, I didn't know anybody. I just started. And so in order to build these relationships, I employed my superpower. Annoying persistence. When there was an OT problem that was caused, and we know this happens, that was caused by IT, I began asking IT people who to talk to about it. And then I try to connect the right IT person with the right OT engineer to resolve the problem. And so for every switch restart, for every group policy change, for every firewall mishap, for every WAN outage, I talked and talked until I found the right IT person that we could work with. I'd explain the impact in IT terms. And it was amazing how things began to work. There was problems. There's still problems. And one of the things I did was begin asking when there was IT discussion groups, how can I join that? And I did. And I didn't shy away from the hard questions. IT would throw out challenging questions, and we'd work on a resolution that would address that. And we also pushed back on their assumptions, on their expectations. And through this process of building relationships, I discovered a number of people. They didn't understand OT, but they also understood how important manufacturing was to the company. Now, these relationships were not built quickly or painlessly. They were built through numerous conversations and a shared willingness to allow others the time to learn about what I was talking about, or for me to learn what they were talking about. These relationships grew from identified shared problems, and we suggested alternatives and recognized that both sides had needs that needed to be met. For the OT engineers, there are IT people who are willing to listen to you. But you may have to dig to find them. And IT people, those OT engineers, they know what they're talking about, even though they talk differently than you do. Ask them clarifying questions. Challenge them, but listen. Remember, every difficult encounter is an opportunity to build relationships with OT champions within the IT organization. Another one was communicating priorities. There are stark differences, and we've heard it all this week. We don't have to talk about availability versus confidentiality. You all know that. One of the challenges are that who is the IT's primary customer in a manufacturing company? It is operations. Who is the OT organization's primary customer? Operations. What we deliver to operations, both IT and OT, are radically different. IT provides HR, logistics, sales, supply chain tools for operations to work. OT deals with inputs, outputs, controls, instrumentation measurement, and internal conveyances. Same monster, different ends. You see, the elephant in the room is not the difference between IT and OT. The elephant in the room is how do we both provide operations with what they need? So rather than accusing IT people of misplaced priorities, we need to patiently and repeatedly explain the differences in priorities. My boss and I began talking with a number of IT people on the different responsibilities that needed to be communicated on things about how firewalls need to work for us. The first time I asked for some firewall work to happen at 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. What was my response from IT? Well, not only put a ticket in, but it was, you want to win? 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. That is not in IT's normal mode of operation. But that's the best time. When I explain to them, that is the best time for OT changes to happen. We have all our resources on site. Our technical vendors, who are not necessarily 24/7, can provide the resources to support us. There is also little awareness that OT communications are much more sensitive to network interruptions. 3 pings may be enough to knock an OT system out of, just to make it quit working. And it may take a reboot to restart it all. OT teams need to be willing to explain the different priorities again and again. Not because the IT team is ignorant, not because they don't know what you're talking about, but they don't see it. They don't deal with it on a regular basis. Remember, every conversation is an opportunity to reinforce OT needs for infrastructure availability at the highest priority for the OT organization. Identifying differences. One of the biggest differences in clear communications is sharing the realities that while we work together and use similar technologies, the vocabularies are different. When Richard Morley introduced the Modicon 1 in 1968, what did he call it? A programmable controller. And what were the initials? A PC. In 1981, IBM began using PC to explain their new product, personal computer. That's when PLCs came about, because it was confusing to talk with engineers about PCs. IT has always been stealing automation or OT terminology. I still get IT vendors wanting to talk to me about process automation, and I know we're not talking about the same thing. Ping's a great example of this difference. IT has moved away from using ICMP tools because of the potential for exploitation. In the OT world, what happens if ping is disabled on the entire network? Nothing. That's what happened at Elanco. On this brand new network, in our OT environment, they disabled ICMP. Guess what? Nothing worked. Because in OT, ping is the foundation for establishing communications. How many of you deal with problems like this? Automatic logins for HMI, login banners, multi-factor authentication, CIS hardening, inactive logout screen locks, monthly patching schedule, and password rotations. Those are all things we know how to deal with, but it's different from IT. We need to start someplace. Pick a place, a pain point, and begin talking with the IT team about why that's difficult. And IT people, listen to them. Don't focus on the misunderstandings. Instead, patiently provide explanations and alternative options. Explain the technology. Once again, we're using technology that is similar to IT, so they think they know it, and they do, but not necessarily in the way we use it in OT. A dual NIC PLC is not necessarily creating the same vulnerabilities as a dual NIC server. Ping's a great demonstration of this. We were working on a problem that we were having in our OT environment, and we had a team with IT and our security teams, and I knew it was a firewall problem. And so we were discussing options on how to trouble it. There was a PLC that we couldn't get to communicate with the manufacturing server. And so one of the members from the IT team said, just ping the server from the PLC. And I could have laughed, which was I did internally, but I explained the situation. A PLC can't do that. It can respond to pings, but it can't initiate a ping. And that was the whole root of the problem. Another time we found out, they said, tell us the ports that you're using for our functionality. Well, we use, in one location, we're using Rockwell Automation. And one of the things that, if you've never worked with it on Rockwell Automation, activation is really important. But the problem with Rockwell's activation, their licensing feature, is the service they use, every time you restart the computer, it uses a different port. And so when there were firewall problems with our activation, the IT people said, we can't find the problem because the port changed every time the system was rebooted. We're using the same technology, but differently. Don't get lost in the difficult differences in technology uses. Look at how to leverage the problem to learn when things go wrong. The last one is finding collaborative spaces. The difference between IT and OT environments are very complicated because of their similarities. The best way to work through the differences is by collaborating on problems. And we discovered that progress often came when we found ways when OT found ways to engage with IT, and the reverse was true. We need to find ways to invite their team to work on our systems. That works both ways. The IT people at Elanco, they're very good at that. Sometimes they limited me to view only, but they were very good at letting me come into places. OT people, we're not as good as that. Because IT people get on something and break things. Well, I know why. We know why. But we need to find areas where we can begin working in the same space. A great place to start is meetings. Meetings. Half the meetings I attend right now are IT meetings. Begin pushing yourself into IT situations where they're discussing things. Every time my boss and I talk to someone in IT about a problem, we say, when are you going to discuss this? We want to sit at the table. This is an area where OT teams need to improve. When I started with Elanco, my focus, as I mentioned, my background was both manufacturing controls, but also business IT, and I joined an OT team. And I said my job is to fill in the IT gaps. And I remember the first time I told somebody, I'm going to patch this system. I told the engineer, I'm going to patch this system. What was his response? I'm on his team, and he backed up. I explained how I was going to do it. I said, no, this is what we're going to do. We're going to work with production. We're going to find a downtime. And then we stepped through the processes how we could do it. And I laid out the servers we were going to do. I said, I'm going to communicate with you every step. I'm going to tell you when I start. I'm going to tell you when I'm done. Then we're going to go to the next system. We're going to do it one at a time. And after a year, I got to the point at one of our largest manufacturing sites where we were patching almost all of our OT Windows systems with Microsoft patches every quarter. It's doable. It takes hard work, but it also takes the resources. We can't just say, you don't understand. We need to show them what's going on. We need to invite them into our environments. Collaboration begins with communication. Find ways to talk to one another. There's a lot more details I could go in, a lot of examples I can make, but I want to stop right here. Elanco, we've made a lot of advances in that interpersonal networking. There's still room to make improvements. And we're working on that. And we continue to find ways to work together to improve our security posture for Elanco's manufacturing environment. Because it is the other IT/OT networking that is so important. That interpersonal communication is vital. It is the critical layer to success in cybersecurity. So those are the lessons learned. Now, I've got a little bit of time, so any questions or comments? We may have missed something really big, so if there are any questions or comments, go ahead and share it. Yeah.
So I'm an IT guy by trade, and I'm now finding myself in the OT environment. Right? I'm OT for a shield manufacturer, and so I'm looking in the opposite direction from what you were saying. But I've been finding my biggest challenges is first of all the lack of knowledge about the OT environment. Right? I do have plans to teach myself that, but I've also enlisted the help of my actual plant managers. I actually had meetings with like two of them before I came to this, and the two that I did get to speak with, the other three didn't bother even reply to me or whatever. But I did find that they would be receptive to because they know that things need to improve to get better. So I think you're dead on with that. That was my
Yeah. And just a point on that, when I began using my superpower of persistent annoyance or annoying persistence, I didn't go to the boss. Yeah, just start digging in. Eventually somebody will give in just because you're persistent. Any other questions, comments? All right, well, I hope it's helpful. Appreciate your time.
We will now be taking a break. Please visit our sponsors in the exhibit hall.